"I came here on a recommendation," the Apache girl asked. The rancher knew the truth and stayed silent. The morning sun spread slowly over the wide, open land. The desert air was crisp, carrying a faint smell of dust and wild grass. The ranch, with its wooden fences stretching like lines drawn on the earth, sat quietly among the mesas and rocky hills. A few birds flitted from post to post, their songs breaking the silence. The rancher stood near the barn, his hands resting on the rough wood, watching the horizon. He had lived here for many years, knowing every sound, every movement of this land. Nothing came as a surprise to him, or at least that's what people thought. The sound of wheels on gravel drew his attention. A small pickup truck rattled down the dirt path, kicking up clouds of dust. It slowed as it approached the ranch, and the driver's side door opened. Out stepped a young girl. She carried a small bag over her shoulder and held a notebook tightly in her hand. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she walked toward the ranch house. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved. She was not afraid of this vast, empty land, but her eyes told a story. They were alert, cautious, scanning the ranch as if measuring everything, the fences, the barns, even the distance to the animals grazing nearby. She paused at the edge of the porch, her hand resting lightly on the railing. The rancher watched her from a distance, his face calm, unreadable. He had seen many people come and go, but there was something about her that made him pause. It was subtle, almost invisible, but he sensed it, a strength beneath the surface, and perhaps a story she was not ready to share. "Good morning," she said, her voice polite but firm. "I came here on a recommendation. I was told you might be able to help me." The rancher's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression stayed neutral. He nodded once. "I see. Well, you're here now." His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of someone who had learned to speak only when necessary. "I hope I'm not disturbing anything," she added quickly, glancing around. I just wanted to meet you and see if I could learn or help in any way." The rancher didn't answer immediately. He studied her carefully. Her clothes were simple jeans, a plain shirt, and a jacket that had clearly seen better days. Her hair was tied back neatly, but a few strands escaped and danced in the morning breeze. She had the air of someone used to moving on her own, someone who had learned to take care of herself. He noticed her hands calloused slightly, not from luxury or leisure but from work. And yet, they were gentle too, as if she handled things with care. Finally, he spoke. "You'll need to walk the ranch, see the animals, and understand how things work before you can really help. If that's what you want, I can show you." Her eyes lit up. "Yes, sir. I want to learn everything." The rancher nodded again and led the way toward the barns. He moved with a quiet confidence, each step measured and deliberate. She followed, her notebook held tightly, as if ready to record every detail. She asked questions, small ones at first, about the fences, the animals, the morning routines. He answered them briefly, not giving more than necessary, but there was a calmness in his tone that made her feel welcome. As they walked, the rancher's mind worked silently. He noticed the way she watched the horses, the way she observed the way the cattle moved, even the way she adjusted her footing on uneven ground. She was not just curious. She was studying, learning, noticing details that most newcomers overlooked. And there was something else, a quiet determination. She did not flinch at the heat of the sun or the roughness of the terrain. She moved steadily, like she had faced challenges before. They reached the barn, where the smell of hay and animals filled the air. The rancher opened a large door, revealing horses moving gently in their stalls. She stepped inside slowly, as if entering a sacred place. One of the horses looked at her curiously, its ears flicking back and forth. She crouched slightly and extended her hand. The horse sniffed it and nuzzled her gently. She smiled, a small, quiet smile, and the rancher noticed it. "You have a way with them," he said. She looked up, a little surprised. I've spent some time with horses before. They understand people in ways some humans don't." He nodded, saying nothing more. There was truth in her words, but the rancher also knew there was more she wasn't saying. He didn't press her, though. Some things he had learned had to come out in their own time. The morning passed with her exploring the ranch. She fed the animals, helped carry water, and observed the workers as they mended fences and tended to the land. Every movement, every question she asked, revealed her curiosity and intelligence. She noticed the smallest details, a loose board, the way the sunlight fell on the paddock, the subtle differences in the horse's behavior. The rancher watched her quietly, impressed, but still careful not to reveal what he already knew. During a break, she sat on the porch steps with her notebook, jotting down notes. The rancher leaned against the railing nearby, keeping an eye on her without interfering. She glanced at him briefly, sensing his gaze, but did not speak. She had a natural sense of intuition, perhaps born from experience, and she could tell that the rancher was not just a teacher or guide. He was a man who observed everything and said very little. "You're quiet," she said after a while, breaking the silence. He shrugged slightly. "I've learned that listening tells you more than talking ever can." She nodded slowly, as if accepting a lesson she had learned before but had not put into words. She looked out at the wide, open land, the mountains in the distance, and the animals grazing peacefully. There was a sense of calm here, a feeling of order in the chaos of nature. And yet, she felt a tension she couldn't name, a story hidden beneath the rancher's silence, a truth that waited quietly to be revealed. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they walked toward the back fields. The rancher pointed out various things: the water troughs, the irrigation channels, the way the fences were set to guide the cattle. She asked questions about why certain fences were placed in specific ways, why some animals were kept together while others were separated. He answered patiently, watching her take in the information, her eyes bright with understanding. There was a moment when she paused by a tree, looking out over the horizon. She closed her eyes briefly, taking in the heat of the sun and the breeze. The rancher stopped behind her, waiting, sensing that she was reflecting on something beyond the ranch. Perhaps her past, perhaps a memory she carried quietly. He said nothing, giving her the space she needed. "You've seen a lot," she said finally, almost to herself. "I've seen enough," he replied simply, keeping his tone neutral. But inside, he wondered how much she had seen too, not just the ranch, but life in ways few people her age had experienced. By midday, she had walked almost the entire ranch, noting every detail, asking questions, and learning quickly. She was not just visiting, she was studying, preparing herself. The rancher could see it, a determination that went beyond curiosity. And still, he stayed silent about the knowledge he held. He knew that the truth she carried with her, the real reason she had come, was something she needed to reveal in her own time. Lunch was a quiet affair on the porch. The rancher brought out a simple meal: bread, cheese, and water. She ate slowly, watching the land, listening to the wind, feeling the weight of silence that surrounded them. They spoke in small sentences, but the silence between their words carried meaning. She was learning more than just the ranch's workings. She was learning about patience, observation, and respect. And the rancher, in turn, was learning about her, her courage, her focus, and the quiet strength she carried within her. As the afternoon sun began to descend, casting long shadows across the land, the girl stood by the fence and looked out at the grazing cattle. She had learned a lot in just a few hours, but she also knew there was more to understand, more to experience. The rancher stood a few feet away, watching her. He could tell she was ready to face the challenges that the ranch would present, but he also knew there were challenges beyond the ranch, challenges from her own life, challenges that had brought her here in the first place. "I hope I can really help here," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "You will," he said simply. No promise, no explanation, just a statement of fact. And in those few words there was trust, respect, and a quiet understanding. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, the rancher walked back toward the barn. She followed him, still carrying her notebook, still observing, still learning. There was a sense of beginning here, the start of a journey that neither of them fully understood yet. But one thing was clear. This was the start of something important, something that would change both of their lives in ways they could not yet imagine. The girl paused at the edge of the barn, glancing at the rancher. "Thank you for letting me come here," she said. He nodded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet warmth. "You came here on a recommendation, but it's up to you what you do next." And with that, the ranch remained quiet once more, the wind sweeping across the fields, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings and unspoken truths. The morning after her first day on the ranch, the girl woke early. The sky was still a pale gray, and the sun had not yet warmed the land. She stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool desert air. The ranch was quiet, except for the soft sounds of the animals stirring in their pens. She could hear the faint lowing of cows and the soft nickers of horses. The world felt wide and endless here, but she no longer felt small. She had a purpose, and it was beginning to take shape. The rancher was already outside, moving slowly among the horses. His hands were steady as he adjusted halters and checked the fences. When he noticed her, he gave a brief nod. She returned it, understanding that words were not always needed. On her first day, she had seen how carefully he observed everything, how nothing escaped his attention. Today, she would begin to learn not only about the land, but about the unspoken lessons he seemed to teach with silence. She followed him to the barn, careful not to disturb the horses. The rancher showed her a few things she had not noticed yesterday. The way a horse shifted its weight to indicate discomfort, the subtle signs of a cow that might be sick, the smell of hay that could reveal if it had begun to spoil. Her notebook filled quickly with notes, sketches, and observations. She felt her mind expand with each small lesson, realizing that ranch life was more than chores and fences. It was a careful study of nature, patience, and observation. "You notice everything," the rancher said after a while. His voice was quiet but firm. She looked up, slightly surprised. "I try. I want to understand." He nodded, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Understanding comes from more than seeing. It comes from listening, and sometimes from waiting. She didn't ask what he meant. Some things she had learned already revealed themselves only with time. As the sun rose higher, the day grew warmer. She helped the ranch hands with chores, filling water troughs, mending fences, and gathering feed. Her hands grew rough with work, but she didn't mind. Each task taught her something new, and she appreciated the simplicity of honest labor. She had grown up with stories of hard work, but she had never experienced the rhythm of life that came from tending land and animals every day. Here, every action mattered, every movement had a purpose. The rancher watched her carefully. He noticed the way she interacted with the animals, the way she approached each task methodically. There was no hesitation, no fear. And yet, there was also a quiet caution, as if she had learned to protect herself from disappointment or danger. He understood that look. He had seen it in people who carried burdens they did not share, people who moved through life carefully, always aware of what others might think or say. During a short break under the shade of a large oak tree, she pulled out her notebook. She wrote quickly, her handwriting neat and precise. The rancher leaned against the tree, not saying anything, simply watching her work. She glanced up briefly, noticing his presence but not feeling the need to speak. There was trust in silence. "I've noticed something," she said finally, her voice thoughtful. "The cattle move differently than I expected. It's subtle, but they respond to the land, to the fences, the way the sun falls, even to the wind." The rancher's eyes narrowed slightly. "They do. They're part of the land as much as you and I. You treat the land well, and it will treat you well. Ignore it, and it reminds you quickly." She nodded, taking in his words. There was wisdom in his simplicity, a truth that she could feel even if she did not fully understand yet. She realized that life on the ranch was about more than controlling animals. It was about observing, learning, and respecting the natural order. As they moved through the fields, a sudden movement caught her attention. A young calf had wandered too close to the fence, tangled in a section that had begun to weaken. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and carefully freed it. The rancher observed silently, noting how she handled the situation. She did not panic. She assessed the problem, acted with care, and ensured the animal was safe before stepping back. "Good," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, brushing dust from her jeans, but inside she felt a quiet pride. It was a small victory, but it showed her she belonged here, that she could handle challenges. The rancher's acknowledgement was enough. She didn't need more praise. The day moved slowly, with tasks coming one after another. They repaired a broken gate, checked the irrigation channels, and guided the cattle to a new pasture. Each activity required attention, patience, and sometimes teamwork. She began to notice the unspoken signals the rancher used: a glance, a gesture, a nod, and she learned to respond without needing instructions. Communication here was not always in words. It was in actions, in awareness. Around midday, a visitor arrived at the ranch. A neighboring rancher had come to discuss a trade of supplies. She watched as the two men spoke, their conversation respectful but firm. She noticed the rancher's subtle control of the situation. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did, his words carried authority. She scribbled notes in her notebook, fascinated by the way he managed not only the land but also the people who came into it. After the visitor left, the rancher led her to a quiet spot near a small creek that ran along the edge of the property. The water was clear, reflecting the sky above. She knelt by it, washing her hands and splashing her face. The coolness was refreshing, and she felt a moment of calm. The rancher stood nearby, his eyes scanning the horizon as always, his mind seemingly elsewhere but fully present. "You're thinking," she said softly, looking at him. He glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Observing," he corrected. "Thinking comes later. Sometimes, if you observe well, thinking becomes easier." She smiled, understanding more than he realized. Observation had already taught her more than any lecture or book could. She began to feel a sense of rhythm in the ranch, a connection to the land and the animals. It was not just work, it was learning, living, understanding. Later in the afternoon, they returned to the barn to feed the horses. She noticed that one of the older horses, a chestnut mare, seemed uneasy. Its ears flicked back, its tail swishing nervously. She approached slowly, speaking in soft tones, letting the horse see her intentions. The rancher watched her carefully, impressed by her patience and calm demeanor. She reached out, brushing the horse gently, and within moments the mare relaxed. "You have a way with them," he said again, almost as a statement to himself. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "I think they understand trust. They can tell when someone is patient, when someone is honest." He nodded, thinking about her words. There was wisdom there, too, beyond her age. He could sense that she had learned hard lessons in life, lessons that had taught her patience, caution, and resilience. And he understood why she had come here, though she had not spoken it. He would let her reveal it in her own time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, they worked together to close the gates and settle the animals for the night. The girl's movements were steady, confident, but there was still a softness to her care. She handled each task with attention, aware of the land and the creatures that depended on it. The rancher observed quietly, recognizing her determination and intelligence. He still said little, letting her learn through experience. Finally, the workday ended. The rancher and the girl stood on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of gold and pink. The air was cool now, the heat of the day replaced by a gentle breeze. The land seemed to sigh in the fading light, calm and peaceful. She felt a quiet sense of belonging, a feeling she had not expected when she arrived this morning. "Thank you for today," she said quietly. "You earned it," he replied. His voice was calm, steady, carrying a weight of truth. "Tomorrow will be the same. You'll learn more if you pay attention." She nodded, understanding that this was not just about work. It was about learning, growing, and understanding a way of life that was both harsh and beautiful. She felt ready for whatever came next, and she knew that the rancher would guide her, silently, patiently, without needing to speak everything aloud. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, she felt a sense of hope and anticipation. This was just the beginning of her journey, a journey that would teach her more than she could imagine. And somewhere in the quiet of the rancher stood silently, knowing that the truth she carried was still hers to reveal, and that he would be there, watching, guiding, and waiting patiently for the right moment. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the ranch, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The air was warmer than the previous day, carrying the scent of earth, hay, and wild grass. The girl woke before dawn, her mind already moving through the tasks of the day. She had learned much since arriving, but she sensed that today would be different. There was a tension in the air, subtle but unmistakable, and her instincts told her that she would be tested in ways she had not yet experienced. She dressed quickly, lacing her boots tightly, and stepped outside. The ranch was quiet except for the sounds of birds waking and the faint rustling of the wind through the trees. The rancher was already up, standing near the barn, his eyes scanning the land with the practiced attention of a man who knew every detail, every hidden corner. When he saw her, he nodded briefly. She returned it, understanding that he was ready to begin the day's work. "Today," he said, "you'll work with the cattle in the back fields. It won't be easy, but you'll learn more than you have in the past 2 days combined." She nodded, gripping her notebook, though she knew that much of what she would learn could not be written down. It had to be experienced. They walked together to the back fields, the land stretching wide and open around them. The cattle were grazing peacefully, but the rancher's sharp eyes noticed one young steer straying too close to a weak section of the fence. Without a word, he gestured toward the girl, indicating that she should take action. She approached carefully, her movements deliberate and calm. She spoke softly to the animal, using a gentle tone to guide it away from danger. The steer paused, hesitated, then followed her lead, moving back to the safety of the herd. She smiled quietly, satisfied with the small victory. The rancher observed silently, noting her focus, patience, and ability to act under pressure. "You have good instincts," he said finally. She looked up, surprised by his words. "I've learned to pay attention," she said softly, "to notice small things before they become problems." He nodded, saying nothing more. There was truth in her statement, and he recognized that it came from experience, not just observation. She had learned to rely on herself, to trust her own judgment, and that trust would be tested today. As they continued through the fields, a sudden commotion caught their attention. A group of younger cattle had broken through a weakened section of the fence farther down the field. They were running in different directions, some toward the trees, others toward a small ravine. The rancher's eyes narrowed. This was the test he had sensed. "Move quickly," he said. "We need to gather them before they scatter further." The girl's heart raced, but she didn't panic. She quickly assessed the situation, noting the positions of the animals, the layout of the land, and the direction of the wind. She called out calmly, using her voice and gentle movements to guide the nearest cattle back toward the main herd. She ran alongside them, moving with purpose, never losing control or focus. The rancher followed closely, his presence steady and reassuring. He intervened when necessary, redirecting a stubborn steer or guiding a group that veered too far. Together they worked in a careful rhythm, moving as one, understanding each other without the need for many words. The girl realized that this was more than physical work. It was a test of patience, intelligence, and communication. After what felt like hours, though it was only a part of the morning, the herd was finally gathered and safe. The girl leaned against a fence post, breathing heavily but feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. The rancher watched her silently, his expression unreadable but his eyes showing quiet approval. "You handled that well," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. I think I understand why you let me try." "You wanted to see if I could manage on my own." He nodded slightly. "You learn more when you face challenges yourself. Observation is important, but action tests character." She considered his words carefully. There was wisdom in them, and she realized that the rancher had been testing her all along, in subtle ways she had not noticed. He had watched her carefully, waiting for her to demonstrate courage, patience, and intelligence. She had passed the first real test of the ranch. The rest of the day was spent repairing the broken fence and ensuring the cattle were secure. She worked tirelessly, her muscles aching but her mind alert. She asked questions when she needed guidance but acted independently whenever possible. The rancher offered advice sparingly, only when necessary, letting her learn through experience. During a brief break near the creek, she sat down to rest. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the gentle sound of the flowing stream was soothing. She looked at the rancher who was checking the fence along the far side of the field. "Do you ever get tired of all this?" she asked quietly. He looked up at her, considering the question. "No," he said finally. "The work never ends, but it matters. That's why it's worth it." She nodded thoughtfully, understanding more than she could express. Life on the ranch was hard, demanding, and sometimes unforgiving, but it was also meaningful, grounded, and honest. She felt a growing respect for the land, the animals, and the people who worked it. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, a sudden call from one of the ranch hands drew their attention. A horse had slipped its reins and bolted toward the open plains. Without hesitation, the girl ran toward it, remembering what she had learned over the past days. She moved carefully but quickly, her eyes tracking the horse's movements. She called to it in soft, steady tones, guiding it back toward safety. The rancher followed, watching silently. He noted her courage, her quick thinking, and her calm under pressure. She was not just learning, she was proving herself, earning his respect through action rather than words. By evening, the work was done and the ranch was quiet once more. The cattle were secure, the fences repaired, and the animals settled for the night. The girl stood on the porch, her notebook in hand but untouched, as if the events of the day had spoken louder than any words she could write. The rancher joined her, standing silently beside her. The sky was painted with hues of red and gold, the sun dipping behind the distant hills. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of earth and the soft sound of nocturnal creatures stirring. "You did well today," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. She looked at him, a small smile forming. "I felt challenged, but I learned a lot." "That's the point," he replied. "Challenges teach more than comfort ever will." She nodded, understanding the depth of his words. The day had tested her patience, her intelligence, and her courage. She had faced situations that required quick thinking and steady hands, and she had risen to meet them. She felt proud, but also humble, recognizing that there was still much to learn. As darkness settled over the ranch, they walked back to the barn together. The animals were quiet now, the only sounds the occasional lowing of cows and the soft nickering of horses. The girl felt a deep sense of connection to this land and the creatures that depended on it. She understood that she was part of something larger, a rhythm of life that required respect, patience, and care. That night, as she sat on the porch under the stars, she reflected on the day's events. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and the quiet guidance of the rancher. She realized that this journey was not just about work on the ranch. It was about learning to trust herself, to act with confidence, and to face challenges with patience and intelligence. The rancher watched her silently, knowing that she had grown. He understood that she carried her own history, her own reasons for being here, and he continued to stay patient, waiting for her to reveal what she was ready to share. He had seen her courage, her determination, and her ability to face challenges head-on. And he knew that her journey was only beginning. As the stars filled the night sky, the girl felt a quiet sense of hope. She had faced her first real trials and had succeeded. She understood the value of observation, patience, and action. And she felt ready for whatever challenges awaited her tomorrow. The rancher stood silently beside her, a steady presence in the night. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that she had the strength, courage, and intelligence to meet it. And somewhere in the quiet of the ranch, a bond was forming, one built on respect, trust, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes silence teaches more than words ever could. The sun had just begun its climb over the horizon, casting golden light across the ranch. The girl woke to the soft sounds of the animals stirring and the distant hum of wind moving through the open plains. Her body ached from the past day's work, yet she felt a quiet excitement. She had proven herself capable in ways she hadn't expected, but she knew that today would not just test her skills, it would test her heart. She dressed quickly, fastening her boots and pulling on her jacket. The air was cool, but she welcomed it, taking a deep breath and enjoying the clean, open scent of the desert. As she stepped outside, she noticed the rancher already moving through the fields. His steps were steady, deliberate, carrying the weight of years and the quiet authority of someone who had seen much and said little. "You're up early," he said without turning to her. "I like to see the ranch wake up," she replied. "Everything feels different in the morning." He nodded slightly, understanding her thought without needing further explanation. She followed him toward the barn, her notebook tucked under her arm but untouched. Today, she sensed, would be more about observation, experience, and understanding than about writing notes or asking questions. The rancher led her first to the pasture where the younger horses were kept. A few had grown restless overnight, pacing and whinnying softly. She knelt beside one of the foals, gently running her hand along its neck. It nuzzled her in return, and she smiled. There was a calm rhythm to the interaction, a trust forming between her and the animals. She understood instinctively that patience and gentleness often taught more than force. "Good," the rancher said quietly. "They respond to respect. You've learned that quickly." I try to understand them," she replied. "They're part of this place. They feel it even if we don't always notice." He paused, looking at her, his expression unreadable but his eyes thoughtful. He saw more than she realized, that she not only observed but she felt deeply. There was empathy in her actions, a natural understanding of the creatures and the land. And perhaps, he sensed, that same empathy guided her understanding of people too. After feeding and checking on the horses, the rancher led her toward the back fields. Today, the cattle were calm, but he pointed out areas where the fences needed attention. As they worked together to reinforce a weak section, the girl spoke softly, breaking the silence in a way that felt natural rather than forced. "I didn't come here just for work," she said after a moment, glancing at him. I came because I wanted to learn from someone who understands this land, but also I needed a place where I could start over." The rancher's hands paused briefly on the fence, but he did not speak. Instead, he continued his work, letting her words hang in the air. She realized she had shared more than she intended, but she also felt a strange relief. For the first time, she sensed that someone might understand her without judgment, without pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. "You've faced a lot," he said finally, his voice calm, measured. "That doesn't make you weak. It shows strength." She looked at him, surprised by the honesty and simplicity of his words. It was the first time he had acknowledged anything personal, and it carried a weight that made her pause. She nodded, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. The rest of the morning passed with tasks that required attention and care. She repaired gates, checked the water troughs, and guided the cattle through the fields. With each action, she felt her confidence grow. The rancher watched silently, his presence steady, offering guidance only when necessary. She began to notice subtleties she had overlooked before, the way the wind affected the cattle, the signs of a fence about to weaken, the small movements that revealed a horse's discomfort. By midday, they paused near a quiet grove of trees for lunch. She sat on a fallen log, unpacking a simple meal. The rancher remained standing, scanning the fields as always. She watched him, noticing the way he moved, the quiet assurance in his actions, and the patience that seemed to flow naturally from him. "I think I understand why you stay silent so much," she said softly, breaking the calm. He looked at her, one eyebrow slightly raised. "And why is that?" "Because sometimes listening teaches more than speaking," she replied, her eyes thoughtful. "And sometimes people need to find their own answers, even if you know the truth already." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He did not respond, but she sensed approval in his quiet presence. For the first time, she felt like he saw her not just as a visitor, but as someone capable of understanding the unspoken ways of this ranch. After lunch, a sudden commotion drew their attention. One of the horses had wandered too close to a rocky area and seemed frightened. The girl moved quickly but carefully, speaking in gentle tones to calm the animal. The rancher observed silently, his eyes sharp and attentive, noting her calm demeanor and quick thinking. She guided the horse back to safety without panic, her movements smooth and confident. "Good work," he said quietly, not as praise but as acknowledgement. "Thank you," she replied, a little breathless. She felt a quiet pride but also a deeper connection to the rancher's presence. She realized that he had been testing her patience and empathy all along, allowing her to show courage without interference. As the afternoon wore on, the rancher led her to a quiet area near the creek. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the gentle sound of flowing water created a calm atmosphere. She knelt by the creek, letting her hands touch the cool water. He stood nearby, silent as always, but she felt the weight of his presence in a comforting way. "I've been carrying a lot with me," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not everyone understands or even wants to understand, but here it feels different. I feel like I don't know, breathe." The rancher remained silent, but his eyes were gentle. He did not push her to speak more. Some truths, he knew, revealed themselves in their own time. She was ready to begin that journey, and he would stay by her side, quietly guiding, observing, and protecting. Later, as they returned to the barn, she noticed the older horses watching her more closely. They seemed calmer, more trusting, as if they had sensed her understanding and patience. She realized that the lessons of empathy and careful attention applied not just to animals but to people as well. The rancher had shown her that through quiet example, teaching more in silence than many could in words. By evening, the tasks were complete, and the ranch was calm. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in rich golds and purples. She stood on the porch, looking out over the fields, feeling the vastness of the land and the smallness of her own worries. Yet for the first time she felt a sense of peace, of belonging, and of trust in the process of life on the ranch. "You've learned well," the rancher said finally, joining her on the porch. She looked at him, surprised. I think I have. But there's still so much I don't know." "That's the point," he replied. "Learning never ends. You've learned to see, to act, and to understand more than you realize. That's what matters." She nodded, feeling a quiet warmth in his words. She realized that she had not only learned about the ranch, but had also begun to open herself to trust. She had shared a piece of her past without fear, and the rancher had accepted it without judgment. The bond between them had deepened, built on patience, respect, and understanding. As the stars appeared in the night sky, she sat quietly, reflecting on the day. The rancher stood beside her, his presence steady, a silent anchor in the vast desert night. She realized that this place, these experiences, and this man had given her more than she had expected. She had found a safe space to grow, to learn, and to begin healing from the weight she had carried with her. The rancher, watching the stars, thought about the quiet courage she had shown. He knew her journey was only beginning, but he also knew that she had the strength to continue, the patience to learn, and the empathy to understand both animals and people. And he would continue to guide her quietly, respecting her pace, allowing her to discover truths in her own time. The night air was cool and calm, carrying the soft sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. She closed her notebook, feeling that today's lessons could not all be written down but must be felt and remembered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to learn, and new moments to grow. And she was ready, for the first time truly ready to face them. Somewhere in the quiet of the ranch, the bond between the girl and the rancher had strengthened. It was not spoken in words, but in shared experiences, quiet observation, and mutual respect. And as she finally stepped inside for the night, she felt a sense of hope and belonging that she had not felt in a long time, knowing that she was not alone, and that her journey was only beginning. The morning sun broke over the horizon in brilliant gold and pink, casting long shadows across the ranch. The girl woke feeling a quiet excitement. Today, something inside her felt different. She had worked hard, learned much, and faced challenges she hadn't known she could handle. Yet, beyond the work, she felt a new sense of confidence, a belief in herself that had been missing before she came here. She stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool desert air. The land seemed alive with possibility. The rancher was already up, moving with his usual quiet determination among the horses and cattle. His presence was steady, reassuring, and she felt a sense of calm just being near him. "You're early," he said, his voice low and calm. "I wanted to see everything," she replied softly. "I want to remember it, learn it all." He nodded but did not speak further. He didn't need to. Today would not just be about work. It would be about understanding the deeper rhythm of the ranch and the unspoken lessons he had been teaching her since her arrival. The day began with the usual tasks. She checked the fences, guided the cattle, and tended to the horses. But this morning, she noticed things she hadn't before. The subtle changes in the wind that affected the animals, the way shadows shifted across the fields, the sounds of life in the desert that gave clues about where the animals were. She moved through the ranch with an awareness and confidence that made even the rancher pause. "You're learning faster than I expected," he said quietly, observing her work. She smiled, feeling a sense of pride but also humility. I'm trying to pay attention. I want to do it right." "You are," he replied. "That's what matters." Later, they came to the pasture where the younger horses grazed. A few of them were restless, and one foal wandered near a fence that had been weakened by a recent storm. The girl approached it carefully, using soft words and calm movements to guide it back to safety. The rancher watched, impressed, noting the calm determination in her eyes and the gentle firmness in her hands. "You've grown comfortable with them," he said. "They trust you." She looked up, a small smile forming. "I think I've learned to listen to them, not just watch." He nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. His eyes, usually so guarded, showed a quiet pride. For the first time, he allowed himself to openly acknowledge what she had accomplished. She had not only learned skills, but she had shown empathy, courage, and patience. After lunch, the rancher led her to a quiet part of the ranch, near a grove of trees beside the creek. The water sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, and the gentle sound of flowing water filled the air. They sat together on a fallen log, the silence comfortable, the only sound the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. "I want to thank you," she said quietly, "for letting me come here, for letting me learn at my own pace." The rancher looked at her, his expression softening. "You earned it," he replied simply. "I could see your determination from the moment you arrived. You had to prove it to yourself, not to me." Her eyes met his, and she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just pride or gratitude, it was trust. She realized that she could share a part of herself with him without fear of judgment. She felt understood in a way that was new and comforting. "You know," she said hesitantly, "I didn't come here just for the ranch. I needed a place where I could start over, where I could feel like I belonged." He listened quietly, as he always did, letting her speak without interruption. There was no rush, no pressure to reveal more than she wished. He understood that some truths had to come from the heart, not from words forced by circumstance. "You belong here," he said finally, his voice steady. "Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. You've shown strength, patience, and understanding. That is enough." Her chest tightened and she looked down, fighting the emotion that threatened to spill over. For so long she had carried doubts about herself, about where she fit in the world. But here, on this land, under this sky, beside this quiet man who understood more than he said, she felt a sense of peace and acceptance she had never known. The afternoon passed with tasks that were now familiar but still demanding. She guided the cattle to a new pasture, checking fences along the way, her movements fluid and confident. The rancher followed silently, stepping in only when necessary, watching her with quiet satisfaction. She noticed that he no longer needed to test her with small challenges. She had proven her ability, her courage, and her understanding. Later, they returned to the barn to settle the animals for the night. The cattle were secure, the horses calm, and the chores complete. She stood on the porch, looking out over the fields, feeling a sense of accomplishment and calm. The rancher joined her, leaning against the railing beside her. "You've changed in the past few days," he said quietly, "not just in skill, but in understanding. You see more than just the work. You see the land, the animals, and yourself." She smiled softly, feeling a warmth in his words. I feel different too, stronger maybe, and more connected, I think." He nodded, silent for a moment as if considering her words. "You are. And that is something few people learn in a lifetime." As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in rich colors of gold and purple, she felt a sense of completion. She had started this journey seeking guidance and purpose, but she had found more than that. She had found trust, respect, and a sense of belonging. She had faced challenges, learned lessons, and begun to understand herself in ways she had not before. That evening, as darkness settled over the ranch and stars began to appear in the night sky, they sat quietly on the porch together. The air was cool, carrying the soft sounds of animals settling and the gentle rustle of wind through the trees. She closed her notebook, realizing that not all lessons could be written down. Some had to be felt, experienced, and remembered in the heart. "You've done well," the rancher said finally, breaking the quiet. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft but steady, "for everything. For being patient, for understanding." He nodded, looking out at the fields with a quiet satisfaction. "I didn't do anything. You did it yourself. I just let you find your own way." She felt a deep sense of gratitude and trust. For the first time, she knew that she could face challenges, understand the world around her, and trust in her own strength. The rancher had guided her without forcing her, had observed without judgment, and had given her the space to grow. As the night deepened, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known. This ranch, this land, the animals, and the quiet man who had guided her, all of it had become a part of her journey, a place where she could learn, grow, and begin anew. The rancher remained beside her, silent as always, but his presence spoke volumes. He knew her story, or at least part of it, yet he had allowed her to discover her own strength without interference. He had watched, guided, and respected her pace, and now he saw the results: confidence, understanding, and trust. The girl finally spoke again, her voice soft, carrying a mixture of gratitude and hope. I think I've found a place where I belong." The rancher smiled quietly, a rare expression full of approval and warmth. "Yes," he said simply, "you have." And with that, the night settled over the ranch. The stars shone brightly above the wide, open fields, and the girl felt a sense of peace, hope, and belonging. She had faced challenges, learned lessons, and found strength she hadn't known she possessed. The rancher, standing silently beside her, knew that she was ready for whatever came next. The bond between them had grown strong, not through words, but through shared experiences, patience, and understanding. It was a bond built on respect, trust, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the greatest lessons are learned in silence. As the wind swept softly across the fields, the girl closed her eyes, taking in the beauty and vastness of the land. She had come here seeking guidance, but she had found so much more. She had found courage, confidence, and a sense of belonging. She had found someone who understood her without needing her to explain everything. And she knew, deep in her heart, that she was no longer alone. The rancher stood quietly beside her, watching the land he had cared for all his life. He understood her journey, and he knew she had grown. He had stayed silent when needed, guided when necessary, and now he could see the results of patience and trust. The night deepened, the stars shimmering like tiny lights in the vast darkness. The ranch was calm, peaceful, and full of life. And in that quiet moment, the girl knew she had arrived, not just at the ranch, but at a new beginning. She had found her place, her strength, and her trust. And the rancher, silent but proud, knew that she was ready to face whatever the future held.